Hi there, my name is Orestes Ponce de Leon, and you are listening to the Cobra Effect podcast. In this show, I cover the unintended consequences of government policies throughout history. We delve into 4,000 years of how even the best-intentioned ideas can backfire, leading to revolt, failure, and shocking events. In this episode, we first travel 2,400 years to ancient Athens, where the playwright Aristophanes was a whip of Athenian society, and nothing escaped his sharp satire. Written in 391 BC, Aristophanes' play Assemblywomen mocks the absurdity of collectivist utopian dreams. In one of the scenes of the play, the main character, Praxagora, explains to her husband Blepyrus the following.
I shall begin by making land, money, everything that is private property, common to all. Then we shall live on this shared wealth, which we shall take care to administer with wise thrift. The poor will no longer be obliged to work. Each will have all that he needs: bread, salt, fish, cakes, tunics, wine.
Still not fully convinced, Blepyrus asks, but who will till the soil? To which Praxagora responds,
The slaves. Your only concerns will be to scent yourself and to go and dine.
Aristophanes understood the nonsense of such utopian dreams. When the 20th century arrived and entire nations attempted to put into practice such collectivism, everybody, except the ruling elites, became the slaves Praxagora had planned to till the soil in Aristophanes' play. The collectivist delusions of Stalin and Mao starved 7 million human beings to death during the Holodomor and 45 million during the Great Leap Forward. However, suppose we remove from the equation the factor of state violence, which was present in all communist attempts to collectivize property in the 20th century. In that case, the efforts of collectivization still end in failure. Even with the best of intentions, the unintended consequences of such ideas turn the dream of harmonious shared prosperity into a nightmare of scarcity. For today's episode, let's meet Robert Owen, a Welsh textile manufacturer who was compassionate and tried to improve the living conditions of the working class of the early 19th century. The Industrial Revolution was in full swing, and ideas of equality and the eradication of poverty were gaining increasing popularity among philanthropists and social reformers, including Owen himself. In 1816, Robert Owen expressed in a speech, and I quote, I know that society may be formed to exist without crime, without poverty, with health greatly improved, with little, if any, misery, and with intelligence and happiness increased 100-fold. End of quote. Owen believed that individualism was the root of all evils and that education was the key to eliminating self-interest. Only collective sharing of property and production was going to increase happiness 100 times as he wanted. With this goal in mind, Robert Owen traveled to the United States in early 1825. By then, he was already famous, and influential people wanted to hear more about his ideas of deep social reforms. He met with leaders of Congress and Presidents James Monroe and John Quincy Adams. Quincy Adams had just been sworn into office. In a letter to a friend, Robert Owen said, and I quote, in fact, the whole of this country is ready to commence a new empire upon the principle of public property and to discard private property. End of quote. In April 1825, weeks after arriving in the US, Robert Owen purchased the town of Harmony in Indiana. He bought it from the Rapites, a religious group that had previously built the whole settlement. Owen renamed the town New Harmony and set out to implement his utopian vision. To this end, the 900 new inhabitants of New Harmony set out to use the already cultivated land, buildings in excellent condition, and sufficient livestock acquired from the Rapites. A year later, after arriving in New Harmony in early 1826, Robert Dale Owen, the son of Robert Owen, tells in his memoir how, and I quote, "For a time, life there was wonderfully pleasant and hopeful," end of quote. There was freedom of speech, weekly concerts, and meetings were held to discuss the community's principles. Note how Owen's son says that things were going great for a time. The fact is that New Harmony was experiencing, one by one, even before Robert Dale's arrival, the problems that a century later tragically suffered the countries where Marxist-inspired socialism was implemented. The evolution of New Harmony has many historical parallels with the later communist regimes of the 20th century. From Enver Hoxha's small Albania to Mao's gigantic China, they suffered the same problems Robert Owen's New Harmony suffered. Problems such as low production, inefficiency, waste, informants, surveillance everywhere, personality cult, violence against dissidents, and an elite blind to reality. Since the early days of New Harmony, outsiders and residents themselves provided testimony of the accumulated problems. R.L. Baker, a visitor who went there on business, described how, and I quote, "The streets are filled with idlers, all who have something to do or to say, which one could do for 10, end of quote. A resident named Thomas Pears wrote that, and I quote, "Instead of striving who should do most, the most industry was manifested in accusing others of doing little," end of quote. To which he added, "resulted in the rain of reports." It sounds exactly like the Soviet KGB. Added to the labor shortage, because of the endless discussions of the ruling committee, agricultural and artisanal production stalled. All of these started to produce scarcity. This is all far from the 100-fold increase in happiness that Robert Owen had wished for before. The inefficiency of the distribution system compounded the shortages. A villager named Paul Brown recalled in his memoirs that, and I quote, "Even salads were deposited in the store to be handed out, making 10,000 unnecessary steps and causing them to come to the tables in a wilted and deadened state," end of quote. Robert Dale, Robert Owen's son, explains how since the beginning, and I quote, "The executive committee had estimated the value of each person's services and giving all persons employed credit for the amount of goods they could remove from the stores," end of quote. This distribution system proved inefficient, discouraging production and creating a vicious cycle that repeated itself over and over. This is why for Robert Dale, life was initially pleasant and hopeful, but as he said, for a while. How then was New Harmony financed? By squandering the fortune of Robert Owen, who, in early 1826, just a year after the creation of New Harmony, decided to go a step further and pass a new constitution to establish the final phase, a community of equality based on the principle of common property, as his own Robert Dale narrates. Robert Dale explains that under this new constitution, and I quote, "all members, according to their ages, not according to the actual value of their services, were to be furnished, as near as can be, with similar food, clothing and education, and as soon as practicable, to live in similar houses," end of quote. This is the classic definition of a communist society. Almost 50 years later, in 1875, Karl Marx wrote the Critique of the Gotha Program, a letter where he summarized the future communist society. There, Marx says, "From each according to his ability, to each according to his needs." Pretty similar to what Robert Owen had in mind. The failure of New Harmony accelerated. A first dissident group decided to live in the face of the growing religious animosity of Owen, who, 2 weeks after the new constitution was approved, was invested with absolute decision-making powers. The New Harmony local newspaper said in its editorial, and I quote, "Under the sole direction of Mr. Owen, the most gratifying anticipations of the future may be safely indulged." End of quote. Owen set up a check-off system where every resident was evaluated on the basis of his work, and every Sunday, the results were given at a public meeting. By the fall of 1826, a year and a half after the creation of New Harmony, Owen expelled 20 families he had deemed undesirable to the community. Despite the problems that were piling up, in May 1827, Owen gave a speech and proclaimed that, and I quote, "The social system is now firmly established, and I could not feel more joy in knowing that the obstacles were overcome." End of quote. New Harmony was dying, and Owen was living in an alternate reality. By 1828, this utopia of collective brotherhood disappeared. Owen blamed the failure on the inhabitants themselves for not being material for the new men that such an ideal society was supposed to conceive. Of course, the fault always lies with others. However, Robert Dale, Owen's own son, understood the nature of the failure, what he called the chief error, and was prophetic, and I quote, "I do not believe that any industrial experiment can succeed which proposes equal remuneration to all men, the diligent and the dilatory, the skilled artisan and the common laborer, the genius and the drudge. I speak of the present age. What may happen in the distant future, it is impossible to foresee and imprudent to predict." End of quote. Robert Dale was prophetic, indeed. Today, we know of these failures and their human cost. The 20th century is full of them. However, we did not even need to wait until the 20th century and the Bolsheviks' rise to power in Russia. Similar to Owen's New Harmony, Étienne Cabet, a French philosopher and socialist, created a movement whose members were called the Icarians. This was an egalitarian movement that settled and created communities in Texas in 1848, in Illinois in 1849, in Iowa in 1852, in Missouri in 1858, and in California in 1881. All of them failed. As another example, in his book Brook Farm, The Dark Side of Utopia, Professor Sterling Delano mentions that at least 119 collectivist communes were established in the US between 1800 and 1859. Brook Farm was just one of them, another failed utopian experiment in Massachusetts. Let's go back to where we started in ancient Greece, more than 2,000 years ago. In the second part of his work titled Politics, Aristotle criticizes Plato's collectivist theory for an ideal society. There, Aristotle affirms, and I quote, "What is common to a very large number of people obtains minimum care, for all are especially concerned about their own things, less about the common ones, or only insofar as it concerns each one." End of quote. More than 2,000 years ago, Aristotle understood that what belongs to all belongs to none, and worse, the harmful consequences that this represents. The unintended consequence of Robert Owen's collectivist New Harmony was failure, not his utopia of happiness and prosperity. A lesson, I believe, we as humans will never fully learn. Thank you for listening. For additional information and social media links, you can visit thecobraeffectpodcast.com. You can support the show on Buy Me a Coffee or become a monthly member. Links on the website. You help me to cover my costs, and your contribution keeps this project going. Feel free to also reach out via social media or email. The email address is contact@thecobraeffectpodcast.com. I would like to hear your questions, comments, or ideas for a future topic. See you in 2 weeks for another episode of the Cobra Effect Podcast.